Welcome to CSGuitars, the science of loud. Some considerable time ago, I did a video all about the differences between overdrive, distortion and fuzz pedals. That video is still available, it hasn't gone anywhere, but I thought now, since I've got a very nice oscilloscope, I could revisit the topic and show you some waveform manipulations in real time. So to that end, I've gathered up a few pedals that represent the three different clades, two for each, one typical example and one perhaps a little atypical. For example, the Tube Screamer would be a typical example of an overdrive pedal using soft clipping in the circuit to achieve the sound, whereas something like the Klon would be very different, using distortion style hard clipping and blending that with a clean signal, a high headroom clean signal, in order to achieve a very similar overdrive sound. This is all supposed to represent that there are often no hard boundaries between each of these types of effects, and the circuits can blur the lines somewhat. So everything about to be said will be some sort of generalization, and I'll try to point out the exceptions to the rules as we go. But first, let me explain the scope traces. The yellow curve is our input signal being generated by the function generator on the scope. It is a consistent, high impedance sine wave at a frequency that we can select, and has an amplitude equivalent to what you'd get out of an average guitar pickup. This obviously isn't representative of what a real guitar signal is like, which is constantly changing its frequency and amplitude, but this is perfect for repeatable analysis. The green curve is the pedal's output. This will allow us to see how the circuitry of the pedal has changed the input sine wave, made it bigger, and distorted it, changing the waveform's proportions. We'll typically see that at low gain settings it will look closer to the input sine wave as there's less distortion going on, but it will morph and change how it looks as that increases, or as we change the EQ. We'll see that as well with a few pedals. A pedal will often distort differently at different frequencies. We can see that most effectively here with the Vezzpa. Around about the 300 or 400 Hz mark, we'll see a square wave, but as we push up towards the 2K, we're going to see more of a shark fin, sawtooth looking wave. We can also perform frequency analysis, where we take samples across the entire audible spectrum of the gain of the output signal, allowing us to see just what frequencies the circuit is boosting or cutting. Overdrive pedals often feature soft clipping arrangements where the diodes are placed in the negative feedback loop of the op-amp, which clips the difference between the input and output of the op-amp. This generates a subtle rounding of the waveform, usually skewed with a bit of asymmetry, as we can see here with the Tube Screamer. This closely resembles the shape of the waveform when a valve amplifier goes into power amp distortion. Overdrives are trying to replicate the sound and response of a clean valve amplifier being driven so loud that it starts to break up and distort. Across the full range of the drive control, we can see that there's not all that much change to the shape of the waveform, so there's not that much distortion going on inside an overdrive pedal. But a Tube Screamer isn't just about distortion, it's far more revered for its tone shaping abilities in its EQ section. If we look at the frequency response, we can see that this pedal provides a mid-hump, with the frequencies centered just under the 1K region. So the pedal is amplifying those mid-range frequencies before it hits the front end of the amp, modifying how the amplifier reacts, pushing it into more distortion with a tone that the amplifier couldn't achieve on its own. The Klon takes this level boosting to another level entirely. This circuit was originally designed so that it wasn't just another variant on the Tube Screamer, which most other overdrive circuits are. There's a lot of clever innovation in this circuit with hard clipping germanium diodes and a 27 volt headroom clean boost all being blended together with a feed forward network. It results in extreme output levels and a lot of headroom, which are kicking the front end of the amp and retaining a lot of dynamics, which you don't get with something like the Tube Screamer. Putting aside the high headroom and high level, what we're left with tonally is something actually very similar to the Tube Screamer. If we look at the frequency response, we can see that it's exactly the same mid-peak, although with a bit more in the low end coming from this pedal that we lose with the Tube Screamer. There's also a lot more range and subtlety with the Klon. If we turn the gain control pretty much all the way down, we'll see that it resembles the input sine wave very closely indeed, and we can use that output level to bring it up as a clean boost without the distortion. Distortion pedals commonly utilise hard clipping arrangements where a pair of diodes are connected to ground after the op-amp stage, aggressively trimming the waveform and producing a lot of distortion. There are a lot of great distortion pedals out there, but for my money, some of the best are still the Revv pedals. The G3 here is replicating the purple channel on their generator amplifier. This is essentially a solid-state replica of the amplifier's valve preamp section. Looking at the scope, we can see a much more aggressive distortion with a rounded square wave. What's most interesting here, I think, is the active EQ controls and how much influence they have over both the shape and the level of the output signal. If we visualise a mid-scoop, we can see just how much effect that has over the waveform and why I don't often advise that sound. When it comes to classic distortion pedals, there's only one that needs to be considered, and that is the Proco RAT. This isn't a very complicated circuit, but it does everything exceptionally well. The slow slew rate of the op-amp naturally prevents any very high frequencies being amplified through the effect, attenuates into the upper mids and highs, and makes sure that we keep that thick, saturated distortion without the jar of wasps fizziness that we sometimes associate with distortion pedals. The RAT gets into square wave territory very easily and has a filter control that works in the opposite direction that you think it would. Turning it up removes the high end, changing a square wave into more of a shark tooth wave. Doing a frequency response on the RAT shows once again that its peak frequency is somewhere around the 1K region, although much wider than we see with the Overdrive pedals, and we see that attenuation as it goes into the upper mids and highs. Hey, maybe you noticed I've got a little more rockstar drip than usual in this video. I mean, I'm always pretty damn stylish, they don't call me Captain Fashion for nothing. Captain Fashion. But my natural swag has been augmented by the wonderful people at Gthic Jewelry. Just check out these fantastic pieces from their stainless steel collection. They've got plenty of styles to choose from in rings, pendants and bracelets, so whether you want to deck out your hand sausages in skulls, stones or satanic symbols, Gthic will ensure that your digits stay on fleek. Tony, is that even a thing people still say? If you are in need of some new rocker bling, then check out the link in the description and use discount code Colin20 for 20% off your purchase. Just don't blame me if you end up as incredibly sexy as I am. That's Gthic Jewelry, link is in the description. The classic fuzz arrangement is a two-stage transistor cascading structure, an input booster followed by massive amounts of amplification. This simply applies so much signal gain that it goes well beyond the transistor's capability to cleanly amplify the signal. We recently looked at the Vezzpa in detail, so I'm going to keep the analysis of this one brief. It's a gated fuzz with an optional octave mode. Looking at the waveform, we can see a very asymmetric square wave with the bottom of the wave being clipped far more severely than the top. Engaging the octave mode folds up the negative half of the signal through full wave rectification to double the frequency. On the other end of the fuzz scale, we have the Big Muff, which was an attempt to get fuzz pedals to sustain for longer. It achieves this by adding a second amplification stage after the input booster, giving us 3 transistor stages in all, and both of those amplification stages also feature overdrive style soft clipping. This again provides a variation on a square wave and also benefits from a sound that won't sputter out of existence, which is a bit of a point of contention as many fuzz purists don't even consider the Muff to be a fuzz at all. The passive tone control has a massive influence over how this pedal sounds, giving it all the treble or none at all, and we can see the overtones spike on the waveform as we adjust this control. Doing frequency analysis, we can see just how differently this is EQ'd from the likes of the Tube Screamer. There's so much bass here that it's frankly ridiculous, and we'll also see a mid-scoop around about that 1K region where we'd usually see a hump for a Tube Screamer or the Rat. Hopefully this has been an informative look at the various types of dirt pedals available and a worthwhile addendum to the old video. If any of the pedals that you saw in this video took your fancy and you'd like to get any of them for yourself, links will be in the description below. Don't forget to click all the buttons as well to make this video viable to the ever-changing whims of the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now. Keep it loud and stay safe. Yeah.